Proverbs, the first chapter. We'll continue on this evening with Solomon's second speech, if you will. In today's world, I'm sure you've noticed that we face things that we never thought we would face a few years ago. It seems like in our schools today, and especially in our colleges and different campuses, our children sometimes face temptations that are more serious and strenuous than we ever imagined, certainly than I imagined when I was in the university, and some things which many of us could have never imagined in our formative years. And frequently these temptations come in the form of peer pressure. And of course, we've been warned of peer pressure. Peer pressure was a big subject when I was growing up. It's probably something you talk to your children about. And there seems to be an alluring temptation to just be one of the guys, to fit into the gang, to fit in with the group. And that allure can be very powerful. And you take that lure, if you will, and you toss in the promise of some excitement and some adventure and possibly some riches, and this allure then can be almost irresistible. But then in today's text, in Solomon's speech, he shows us the destination of that type of road. And it's no turning back. It's a dead-end road. It's not even a cul-de-sac that you can turn around and return from, because it is a dead-end road. Read with me, if you will, starting in verse number 8 of Proverbs 1. Solomon says this. He says, "My son, hear the instruction of thy father, and forsake not the law of thy mother. For they shall be an ornament of grace unto thy head, and chains about thy neck. My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. If they say, Come with us, let us lay wait for blood, let us lurk privately for the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them up alive as the grave, and whole as those that go down into the pit. We shall find all precious substance. We shall fill our houses with spoil. Cast in thy lot among us. Let us all have one purse. My son, walk not thou in the way with them. Refrain thy foot from their path. For their feet run to evil, and make haste to shed blood. Surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird, and they lay wait for their own blood. They lurk privately for their own lives. So are the ways of every one that is greedy of gain, which taketh away the life of the owners thereof." I'll say this today, it seems, especially today, it's no different than at any time in the past, but especially today, everyone wants to be a part of a group. It's true at work, it's true especially in school. You know, you go into a school, you go into almost any campus, and especially if you go to lunchroom, you see there's the cool kids table, right? You can see it in a kindergarten classroom. You can see it everywhere. You can see it at work. You're invited to the special meeting, and others are not invited, and you know, you have to be on the in crowd. It's true in churches too, right? There's always an in crowd, and there seems to be cliques that form that go to your normal school. There's always the cool kids that hang out. They're popular students. There's popularity contests everywhere. It's true of government. It's true of politics. Go to Washington, what do we have? We have two huge cliques, right? We can call them conventions. We can call them parties. We can call them whatever you want, but it's just two big in crowds, right? There's the in crowd on the right and the in crowd on the left, and there's a few independents who haven't found their group yet. And so many times we want to join a group for nothing more than peer pressure. We just want to be like everyone else. We want to have a sense of belonging. And sometimes we want to have the benefits of a group. The benefits of a group are sometimes brotherhood, and sometimes the benefits of a group brings riches, but far too often we get swept up in groupthink, and this groupthink allows the wickedness of the collective to carry us off of what we've titled in our study of Proverbs, the royal way of wisdom. Sometimes we want to leave our parents' protection. We want to leave our parent advice so that we can go and do our own thing. And what is it that we want to do when we do our own thing? We want to do what everybody else is doing, right? And it's almost as if our parents know this, because they say, what? You've probably heard the same phrases I heard growing up. If everybody else jumps off a bridge, are you going to jump off the bridge too? Come on, smile if you've heard that. You've heard that, haven't you? Solomon's powerful antidote here is to show us the end of where that thinking leads, the end of that logic. Where is the end of this road? If you step off of the royal way, the royal road of wisdom, where is the end of that road? It's a dead-end road. There's no turnaround. It's not a cul-de-sac. It's the second speech of Solomon here that he gives to his son. And each of these sections that we'll study is a speech. And they all begin with a command from the Father. And his plea is this. His plea is to follow the instruction of the wise Father so that you will have an abundant life, so that you will have good standing. Worldly gain is the road to destruction. And he wants you to escape the greed of this gang. So escaping the greedy gang is my title for tonight. And Solomon starts out with showing the prettiness of wise guidance. Did you know that wise guidance will make you pretty? So many times we want to be beautiful, don't we? We want to be handsome. Well, Solomon tells us how. He says, my son, hear the instruction of the Father and forsake not the law of thy mother. Hear the sounds, the imperative command. It's an impassioned appeal of the parents that they want the child to avoid this sinister temptation. And it's a temptation that he says not might come, but it is sure to come. It means listen and absorb this, employ, engage the teaching. And it brings to my mind when Solomon says, hear the instruction of thy father. It immediately makes me think of the many lectures that I heard from my parents. You've probably heard lectures from your parents. You probably gave some lectures to some of your children as well. My dad would say, well, I can't make these decisions for you, right? Have you ever heard your parents say, I can't make this decision for you? What was coming next? But you're going to hear my advice. Right? I can't make the decisions for you, but you're at least going to hear what is right. I had another preacher friend. You may know this one. You've probably heard the same thing. He says, I'll close my mouth when I close my wallet and I close my front door. That's the way dads talk to sons, isn't it? So this temptation here that Solomon is warning against, it's a temptation that faces every young man. But he says it's not for your benefit. It is seeking your destruction. And so Solomon says, stay on the path. Stay on the path that leads to wisdom. Do not follow the path of these other young men, these rebellious seekers. He says this, stay. Hear the instruction. Forsake not the law of thy mother. Do not follow the path that these other young rebels are taking. It's language that makes me wonder on occasion, where are their parents? Where are the parents of these that are forming this gang? I mean, you have to ask, is anyone providing guidance to these wayward and these wandering drifters? And Solomon says, here. Notice the sources here also in verse number 8. Notice that the father and the mother are engaged. It is the father here that gives instruction. It is the mother here that lays down the law. It takes both parents to provide a proper home. Both of these influences are absolutely essential. This is not the only place in Proverbs we hear this. In 23, verse 22, hearken unto the father that begat thee, and despise not thy mother when she's old. 6, verse 20, my son, keep thy father's commandment, and forsake not the law of thy mother. This is told in the New Testament as well, which quotes the Old Testament, Ephesians 6, verses 1 through 3. Children, obey your parents, plural, in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long on the earth. David recognized this same truth. And he, in fact, fulfilled his primary role of parental responsibility. In Psalm 34, verse 11, we read the Psalm of David that says, "Come, ye children, hearken unto me, and I will teach you the fear of the Lord. I will teach you wisdom," he says. No doubt David passed this to Solomon. We study this in the introduction. We study Solomon's prayer of humility, Solomon's prayer of wisdom, his request of wisdom in our introduction. Where does he learn to request wisdom? But from David, his father. He starts his prayer by saying to the Lord, "You have blessed David my father by giving him a man to sit on his throne." And then he says, "Grant me wisdom." He learned this from his dad. There's a high price for ignoring the wisdom that God offers to us in the Scripture. We know this because Solomon's sons split the kingdom. It was in the sons of Solomon where the kingdom of Israel is split into two nations. Job says in Job 28:28, says, "Behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding." Notice here, thirdly, the status. Not just the sayings, but the status, the instruction, and the wisdom provided here. This guidance is given by the parents, and it's an appropriate guidance. It yields a beauty that cannot be diminished. It's beauty that's not tarnished with age. It's beauty that doesn't fade as the years go by. He says here, "Hear the instruction of the father, and forsake not the law of the mother, for because they shall be an ornament of grace to your head and chains about your neck." An ornament of grace on your head. The Hebrew here literally means it will be a wreath. It's a garland that is placed on the head. And so I want you to picture this when it is speaking here of an ornament of grace to your head. I want you to see it as a wreath. I want you to see it as a garland, a crown of leaves, a crown of flowers that is placed upon the victorious Olympian. That's the picture. He says you will receive a crown, but it's a crown of grace. He says it will be chains about your neck. Not the chains as many assume that are binding. Not the chains of an anchor. Not the chains that would weigh you down. This is not the chains that drown you in the sea. But when he says here, there are chains about your neck, these are the chains that are adornment. These are the gold chains. They're the chains of a necklace, if you will. Ladies like necklaces, right? These are the chains of beauty, the chains for adornment. In Proverbs chapter 3, you're just a page or two over, he says here, "Let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck. Write them upon the table of thy heart. So shalt thou find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and man." He says in chapter 3, verse 21, "Keep sound wisdom and discretion, so shall they be life unto thy soul and grace to thy neck." In chapter 6, verse 21, he offers the son advice to bind them and to tie these instructions about his neck. He says it is a necklace. These instructions, this wisdom, this law will literally be an adornment of beauty. It's the guidance that is offered in these verses, summarized, I would say, in heeding the instruction of parents. It guarantees an attractiveness in both your life and in your position. It is both ornaments and chains. And the obedient child of this type of parents, he says, will have a life of honor. But a life of obedience and a life of rebellion will lead to dishonor, and it will lead to disgrace. So follow that wise guidance, because Solomon says here in the introduction of this speech that it is wise guidance that will make you pretty. Doesn't mean that you will have beauty physically, but that you will have a grace about your life uncomparable to others. And then the next verses 10 through 14, he reveals to his son the proposal that he's going to face. It's the proposal of this wandering gang to whom they will plead with him to join our ranks. This is what you will face. We have given you the instruction, and we want you to bind them to your heart, and they will be grace to your neck. They will be wisdom upon your head. But here's the proposal that's coming to you in the next time period, in the next few years. In verse number 10, you see the warnings. He says, if sinners entice thee, consent not. Entice is an allure. It's especially used, it's especially a connotation of meaning to draw you in by flattery or to draw you in by deception. In other words, they're going to try to get you to join their ranks, and they're going to flatter you, and they're going to deceive you. So don't be flattered. Don't be deceived. And that's why he says, consent not. Again, it's this imperative command. It's an impassioned warning. Don't go along with this nonsense. He says, you know better, or at least you're going to know better as soon as I give you this instruction. This word if here. If sinners entice thee, if they say. This word if in Hebrew is what we use as a conditional clause, but the meaning would be better understood as when, okay? It's as if the Father is stating, this temptation is coming, so you need to be prepared for it. The only thing that is uncertain here is the timing. But this temptation is surely coming. He's not giving advice here for a possibility. The Father is warning his son against peer pressure. In other words, it's not a possibility that this temptation is coming. He's saying it is positive that you will face this. How does Solomon know? Because he faced it himself. He's saying, you're the son of a king. Let me tell you what the son of a king deals with. How do I know? Because I'm an expert at it. Because I am the son of a king. And his message should scream loudly to every one of us that claim to be a child of God, because you are the son of a king. You are the daughters of a king. And not just any king, but the children of a heavenly king. And I will tell you this, there's not a possibility that you will face temptation. It is positive that you will face temptation. The devil does not care about those he already owns. The devil wants you. That's why you will face temptation. And so this is a persuasion that all of us will face, especially the youth, especially those who will attempt to live with a godly character that is befitting to the lineage of kingship. And that's the warning that Solomon is giving here to his children. And he says here in the next set of verses that they are wicked. There's not just warnings, but it's an identification of their wickedness. And see, here now he lays before us a whole myriad of activities that are proposals to trap this young man, but they're all designed to ruin him. All of them now you can recognize by just a couple of words. They're the words that this gang leader is speaking, and they're identified with the opening statement, let us, followed by an action verb. And notice that they're all plural. We'll talk about that in a minute. They're all plural because the temptation is that we're in this together. It's us against them. We are going to beat the system. Does that sound familiar today? Let us do whatever. It's us. You want to get away from your parents because you want to do your own thing. So come join us. So you're not going to do your own thing. You're going to do what we tell you, right? So we are going to beat the system. You see the logic already breaking down in the very first statement, right? Verse 11, what does he say? Come with us. Let us lay wait for blood, violence, bloodshed, adventure, right? Let us lurk privately. We're going to set up an ambush. Violence and bloodshed and an ambush. Notice these words here, without cause. Lurk privately for the innocent without cause. And this is a Hebrew expression that's equivalent to our phrase in the English. It would be translated just for fun. We're going to do this just for fun. So you come along with us just for the fun of it. We're just a bunch of guys. We're just going to go out and have a good time. Nobody's going to get hurt, but what are we going to do? Well, we're going to go lay out an ambush. But nobody's going to get hurt. Well, none of us are going to get hurt. Somebody else might, right? You've heard the expression, it's all fun until somebody gets hurt, right? It's the same term here. This term that is used without cause or just for fun. It's the same thing that Job uses that the author of Job uses in Job chapter 1, verse 9. Does Job serve God for nothing? Does he do it just for fun or just for no reason? In Job chapter 2, verse number 3, you urge me to harm him without a cause. In other words, Satan wanted to mistreat Job without cause. He wanted to mistreat Job just for the fun of it. Just let me go test him. Just let me have at him for a minute. For the pleasure he would derive from it. And here when Solomon writes this, yes, we've already established that Solomon was borrowing from the ancient wisdom. He probably borrowed some of Job's wisdom. But I wonder if Solomon was looking 3,000 years into the future. Let us lay wait for blood. Let us lurk privately for the innocent, just for fun, just for no reason. It's a description of some pretty wicked games that we play today, isn't it? You ever heard of the knockout game? I know, if you're on TikTok, you probably heard of it. It was on the news here a year or so ago. Remember the knockout game? Gangs used to play it. You could be initiated into the gang if you could knock somebody out in one punch. So gang members would sneak up behind somebody, totally unknown, on the sidewalks, in airports, bus stations, and just punch somebody, sucker punch somebody in the back of the head as hard as they could. See if they could knock somebody out with one punch. If you could do that, you're initiated into the gang. It's called the knockout game. Remember getting bricked in Baltimore? Remember the guy that snuck up behind the guy and whacked him over the head with a brick and just killed him instantly? This isn't new. It was happening then, wasn't it? That's what Solomon's describing. Our society has some heinous crimes that they've done on the innocent without a cause. And that kind of junk shows up on social media every day. Just for fun. It's where we live. Verse 12. Let us swallow them up alive as the grave whole, as those that get down to the pit. Pit is from a Hebrew word. It means a hole. It describes a cistern or a prison. It's a dungeon, a fountain. It's a dugout well. Think of Joseph's brothers when they threw him in a pit before they sold him off into slavery. Verse 13. What do they say? We're going to find all kinds of precious substance. We're going to fill our houses with spoil. In other words, we're going to gather all sorts of riches. We're going to get rich doing this. But nobody's going to get hurt. It's just for fun, right? We're going to make ourselves rich with stolen goods, finances. We're going to rob from the rich because they don't need it anyway, right? Look, prince. Look, son of a king. They're trying to trick you. Are you seeing what's going on? You see what Solomon is warning them about? Who's probably one of the wealthiest persons in this particular society? King Solomon. Who's going to inherit all wealth? Solomon's sons. Who's he warning here? He's warning his sons. Hey, these guys aren't going after everybody else. They want you to come join them. You're the son of a king. They're trying to trick you. What they want to really do is spoil you, and they want to take your riches. Don't be fooled by this. Where else are these wayward vagabonds going to find such an easy mark? They want you to join them because they want you. They want your riches. And when they're done stealing from you, they'll throw you to the side. Verse 14, come along with us. Cast in thy lot among us. Let's all have one purse. See, we're going to all be together. We're all going to share the loot. It's all for one and one for all, right? Bunch of pirates. And here it is. The temptation here, all for one for all. They're emphasizing solidarity, right? You're going to have so many friends because you're going to be part of the brotherhood. So you leave the wisdom of your mom, you leave the wisdom of your dad, but just make sure you bring the riches along with you, okay? And you're going to have a brotherhood. You're going to have so many friends. Note the pull of the temptation here. You come be with us so you can do your own thing, and we're all going to do your own thing with you. We're all going to do it together, right? In other words, you come be just like us, and we're all going to do our own thing together. Does this make sense to anybody else? Are you figuring out what these guys really want? Is it any wonder Solomon says, don't go with these guys? Everything they're saying is empty promises that cannot be fulfilled. The world here offers nothing of value, and what it has to offer you is nothing more than burglary and brutality. Is that what you want? Burglary and brutality? That's the proposal of this wandering gang. But now, in the rest of this speech, verses 15 through 19, Solomon reveals to his son the punishment of this wicked group. He starts out by saying, resist them. You need to escape this greedy gang. Resistance is commanded here. Refrain, he says. Walk not thou in the way with them. Refrain thy foot from their path. Again, he begins each section of this speech with an imperative command. That's how you can break it up into these sections. Just find the imperatives. Find commands. Avoid any association with these wicked rebels at all costs. Don't go with them because they run to evil. And so the Hebrew here talks about feet. Refrain thy foot from their path. Their feet run to evil. And this use of feet in these phrases, it's a synecdoche for the direction of your life. And so what he's talking about by feet is where your feet are taking you. It's the path of your life. He says you find yourself the narrow path and avoid the wide path and the broad gate where all of these are going. Verse 15, he says, you don't even step one foot on their path. You avoid their path at all costs. Verse 16, their feet are only towards evil. And notice, their feet are not just towards evil, but their feet run to evil. They're running in this path. They're in a rush. They're in a hurry. They're making haste to shed blood. In chapter 4, verse number 14, you'll see again, Solomon repeats, says, enter not into the path of the wicked, go not in the way of evil men. David in Psalm 1 said, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the way of the sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. Proverbs 24, verse 1, be not thou envious against evil men, neither desire to be with them. And so we learn from that verse, don't go with them. Don't put one foot in the path to go with them. And chapter 24, verse 1, you don't even desire to be with them. Why should you resist so hard? Because there's a reckoning coming. We see that in verse 16. We see their rush. They want blood. But when do they want their blood? They want it now, right? I want my blood and I want it now. See, we live in a instant potato world now, don't we? We want our instant gratification. We don't want to delay. We don't want to work for anything and have delayed gratification. We want instant gratification. And these men, this gang, if you will, they want their reward right away. Have you noticed here, by reading this text, violence is their entertainment? They're entertained by violence. Anything they have to do so they can have something that they didn't earn. I mean, violence is their entertainment. Theft is their object. And so they're going to execute all sorts of burglaries. They're going to crave bloodshed. It says here that they make haste. And so this is a posse that is headlong for bloodshed. But there's a turn of events coming. And these young men, the gang, isn't even aware of it. There's a turn of events. And you need to know that life isn't a video game. There is no redo in life. There is no reset. There is no respawn in life. That's video games. That's make-believe. That's violence on TV. That's a caricature of violence. It's not true. Verse 17. Surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird. It's vanity. It's silliness. It's empty to set a net within sight of the bird. Now this verse is often misapplied, isn't it? In fact, it's misunderstood, and most folks think it's out of place here. But it's really not. At first blush, it seems like it's a little bit out of place, because it's like he's talking about a gang, and now he goes to talk about a bird. And he goes back to talking about a gang. What's that verse doing there? Well, what Solomon is saying is these guys don't have the intelligence of a bird. Let me tell you why. If you set a net where a bird sees it, he's not going to fly into it, is he? You're never going to catch him. If you set a net in where the bird sees it, he'll fly around it. He'll fly over it. He'll fly under it. He'll go anywhere he can, but he's not going to fly into it if he sees it. But what he says here in verse 18 is they lay wait for their own blood. They lurk privately for their own lives. And so what he's saying here is these guys, you don't even set a net where a bird can see it and expect to catch a bird. But these guys are setting a net themselves, not just in their own sight. They're setting a net with their own hands, and they're going to get caught in it. It's their own hands that have set the net, not just in their own sight. And they're the ones that are going to be trapped in their own net. You kind of see the comparison he's making? He says these guys aren't even bird brains. They're worse than bird brains. They're complete and total morons because they can't see to the end of the road that they're running down. They're running full speed into a trap. And guess what? They set the trap and they know where it's at. And they're running full speed to get there. Does that make sense to anybody? It makes sense to these guys because they won't even slow down. Psalm 9, verse 15, the heathen are sunk down into the pit that they made. In the net, does that sound familiar? In the net which they hid is their own foot taken. Now, I'm going to do the best I can to try to explain to you a Hebrew play on words in these next three verses. The literal phrase here is, in the eyes of everything that possesses a wing. Surely in vain the net is spread, here's the literal phrase, in the eyes of anything that possesses, that word's important, a wing. And so our translators took that phrase, possessor of wing, and translated it as bird in our English version. Makes sense, right? Perfect sense. I like that. It's good. And so verse 18 and 19, there's a connection there with verse 17. In verse 17, the phrase possessor of wing is translated as bird. In verse number 19, so are the ways of everyone that is greedy of gain, which taketh away the life of the owners thereof. That literal word there in verse number 19, for owners thereof, is the Hebrew for possessor of the thing. And so you have possessor of wing in verse 17, translated as bird, and in verse 19 you have possessor of the thing, translated as owners thereof. Okay? And so what Solomon is saying in verse number 18, I want you to see this. Solomon is saying, verse number 18, they lay wait for their blood. Isn't that exactly what they offered to do? Look at verse 11. Come with us. Let us lay wait for blood. Well, in verse number 18, that's exactly what they did, right? They laid wait for blood. Solomon points out to the fact in verse number 18 that they lurk privately for their lives, for their own lives. Verse number 18. Isn't that exactly what they promised to do in verse number 11? Let us lurk privately for the innocent without cause. That's exactly what they promised. In other words, Solomon is saying, this is what's going to happen, and this is exactly what they offer to you. No surprises here, right? Solomon explains that in verse number 19. They're greedy of gain. Okay, so are the ways of everyone that is greedy of gain. They're taking away the life of the owners thereof. Literally, that means the possessors thereof, the possessors of the things. And the nuance is the owners thereof, the ones whose life they're taking away, is not the folks that they stole it from. That would be the legitimate owners, okay? What he's saying is, it's not the people that they plundered to acquire the riches that they're stealing their lives. In other words, you stole from me, God's got this, I'm just going on. You didn't steal my life, because my life is wrapped up in my Savior, and I am the Son of King. And you can take anything and everything that I possess in this world, but you can't take my eternal life. That's wrapped up in Christ. The loss of life is on the possessors thereof. They take away the life of the possessors thereof. In other words, it's not the rightful owners whose life they're taking away. It's the ones who are holding goods, right? It's themselves. And so the gang has promised this life. They've promised this luxury. They've promised all of this liberty to this young man. But all that they have succeeded in doing is taking away their own lives, because they are the possessors. They now own this stuff, but it's ill-gotten gain. That's the nuance. That's the play on words in the Hebrew that is very difficult to translate into English. Let me give you an aside. In this particular case, our King James translators supplied some interpreting along with their translating. I want you to look in verse number 18. Depending upon which publisher of the Bible you have, in verse number 18, you probably see the word own is in italics. If you have a certain publication of the Bible that doesn't have that in italics, it's just because they didn't italicize supplied words. Mine does. Most of yours probably do. If your verse 18 has the word own in italics, It means that that is not an original word, but that is a word that is provided by the translators for the sake of clarity or for the flow of meaning. Okay? In this particular case, it correctly identifies for us that this unregenerated, raucous rabble has failed in their attention to acquire riches. They have failed in their promise for ill-gotten gains because they have rejected wisdom as their guide. And so the translators supplied that word own, their own blood, their own lives, because of this Hebrew play on words that's very difficult to translate. And they got it right. They lay wait for not blood. They lay wait for their own blood. And they don't just lurk privately for their lives. They lurk privately for their own lives. In this particular case, it is absolutely correct. Covetousness will never pay. Solomon is going to tell us a little bit later in this book when we get to chapter number 13. Good understanding giveth favor, but the way of the transgressors is hard. The way of the sinner is hard. Transgression never gets you ahead. Even if it gets you ahead for a short period of time in this life, there is a judgment day coming. And remember that the point of this book is a spiritual book. It is spiritual instruction. It's not here to make you healthy and wealthy and wise and put you in a better position in this life. Those are side benefits for these principles. It is to point you to a royal way of wisdom. And it's to point you to Christ that is all wisdom. And these have forsaken all of the wisdom of God, and have done so at their own peril, and they have done so at the cost of their own lives. Verse 19 concludes this speech, and it seals the lesson on our hearts. Those who are greedy of gain, they can try to gather riches by any means, but wisdom alone brings true riches, because wisdom alone, the fear of the Lord, is vertical. Wisdom, as we have defined it, the skillful use of knowledge in the service of God, that's what brings riches. And you can be rich and not have any of this world's possessions. You can gain the entire world and still lose your soul. Jesus, who is the perfect future son of Solomon, expounded to us in Mark chapter 8. He says, what shall it profit a man if he gain a whole world and lose his own soul? That's exactly the question that these young men will not face. They can gain the whole world. They can gain the entire world by any kind of illicit and illegal means, but they will lose their soul in the process. And that's the point Solomon is getting to. Do not follow the greedy gang. You need to escape them at all cost. Flee that temptation. Instead, he says, young man, hear the instruction of your father. Consent not to sinners. Refrain from their path. There is a royal way of wisdom, and you need to be on that royal way. You'll hear next week from Wisdom herself, who comes front and center stage. And Lady Wisdom will be introduced next week. She will proclaim loudly with her first plea. Hear her. Follow wisdom. And forsake the way of sinners. The way of sinners leads to destruction. There's a way that seems right to a man, but the ends thereof are the ways of death. You can gain the world and lose your own soul. Do not follow the rest of this world, because they're nothing more than a greedy gang that seeks your soul. I pray that you would follow the royal wisdom that's given to us by the Father. Let's stand. Brother Derek, if you'll come, we'll sing a verse.